Book 7, Chapter 4 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 4. The old Count, who had always kept up an enormous hunting establishment, but had now handed it all completely over to his son's care, being in very good spirits on this 15th of September, prepared to go out with the others. In an hour's time the whole hunting party was at the porch. Nicholas, with a stern and serious air which showed that now was no time for attending to trifles, went past Natasha and Petya, who were trying to tell him something. He had a look at all the details of the hunt, sent a pack of hounds and huntsmen on ahead to find the quarry, mounted his chestnut Donays, and whistling to his own leash of borzois, set off across the threshing ground to a field leading to the Otradno wood. The old Count's horse, a sorrel gelding called Viflankia, was led by the groom in attendance on him, while the Count himself was to drive in a small trap straight to a spot reserved for him. They were taking 54 hounds, with 6 hunt attendants and whippers in. Besides the family, there were 8 borzoi kennelmen and more than 40 borzois, so that, with the borzois on the leash belonging to members of the family, there were about 130 dogs and 20 horsemen. Each dog knew its master and its call. Each man in the hunt knew his business, his place, what he had to do. As soon as they had passed the fence, they all spread out evenly and quietly, without noise or talk, along the road and field leading to the Otradno covert. The horses stepped over the field as over a thick carpet, now and then splashing into puddles as they crossed a road. The misty sky still seemed to descend evenly and imperceptibly toward the earth. The air was still, warm, and silent. Occasionally the whistle of a huntsman, the snort of a horse, the crack of a whip, or the whine of a straggling hound could be heard. When they had gone a little less than a mile, 5 more riders with dogs appeared out of the mist, approaching the Rostovs. In front rode a fresh-looking, handsome old man with a large grey mustache. "Good morning, uncle," said Nicholas, when the old man drew near. "That's it, come on. I was sure of it," began Uncle. He was a distant relative of the Rostovs, a man of small means, and their neighbor. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist it, and it's a good thing you're going. That's it, come on." This was Uncle's favorite expression. "Take the covert at once, for my Gurchik says the Ilagids are at Korniki with their hounds. That's it, come on. They'll take the cubs from under your very nose." "That's where I'm going. Shall we join up our packs?" asked Nicholas. The hounds were joined into one pack, and Uncle and Nicholas rode on side by side. Natasha, muffled up in shawls which did not hide her eager face and shining eyes, galloped up to them. She was followed by Petya, who always kept close to her, by Michael, a huntsman, and by a groom appointed to look after her. Petya, who was laughing, whipped and pulled at his horse. Natasha sat easily and confidently on her black Arabchik and reined him in without effort with a firm hand. Uncle looked round disapprovingly at Petya and Natasha. He did not like to combine frivolity with the serious business of hunting. "Good morning, Uncle. We are going too," shouted Petya. Good morning, but don't go overriding the hounds," said Uncle sternly. "Nicholas, what a fine dog Trunila is. She knew me," said Natasha, referring to her favorite hound. "In the first place, Trunila is not a dog, but a harrier," thought Nicholas, and looked sternly at his sister, trying to make her feel the distance that ought to separate them at that moment. Natasha understood it. "You mustn't think we'll be in anyone's way, Uncle," she said. "We'll go to our places and won't budge." "A good thing too, little Countess," said Uncle. "Only mind you don't fall off your horse," he added, "because, that's it, come on, you've got nothing to hold on to." The oasis of the Otradno covert came in sight a few hundred yards off. The huntsmen were already nearing it. Rostov, having finally settled with Uncle where they should set on the hounds, and having shown Natasha where she was to stand, a spot where nothing could possibly run out, went round above the ravine. "Well, nephew, you're going for a big wolf," said Uncle. Mind and don't let her slip." "That's as may happen," answered Rostov. "Karay, here!" he shouted, answering Uncle's remark by this call to his borzoi. Karay was a shaggy old dog with a hanging jowl, famous for having tackled a big wolf unaided. They all took up their places. The old Count, knowing his son's ardor in the hunt, hurried so as not to be late, and the huntsmen had not yet reached their places when Count Ilya Rostov, cheerful, flushed, and with quivering cheeks, drove up with his black horses over the winter rye to the place reserved for him, where a wolf might come out. Having straightened his coat and fastened on his hunting knives and horn, he mounted his good, sleek, well-fed, and comfortable horse Viflyanka, which was turning grey, like himself. His horses and trap were sent home. Count Ilya Rostov, though not at heart a keen sportsman, knew the rules of the hunt well, and rode to the bushy edge of the road where he was to stand, arranged his reins, settled himself in the saddle, and feeling that he was ready, looked about with a smile. Beside him was Simon Chekmar, his personal attendant, an old horseman now somewhat stiff in the saddle. Chekmar held in leash 3 formidable wolfhounds, who had, however, grown fat like their master and his horse. 2 wise old dogs lay down unleashed. Some 100 paces farther along the edge of the wood stood Mitka, the Count's other groom, a daring horseman and keen rider to hounds. Before the hunt, by old custom, the Count had drunk a silver cupful of mulled brandy, taken a snack, and washed it down with half a bottle of his favorite Bordeaux. He was somewhat flushed with the wine and the drive. His eyes were rather moist, and glittered more than usual, and as he sat in his saddle, wrapped up in his fur coat, he looked like a child taken out for an outing. The thin, hollow-cheeked Chekmar, having got everything ready, kept glancing at his master with whom he had lived on the best of terms for 30 years, and, understanding the mood he was in, expected a pleasant chat. A third person rode up circumspectly through the wood. It was plain that he had had a lesson, and stopped behind the Count. This person was a grey-bearded old man in a woman's cloak with a tall peaked cap on his head. He was the buffoon, who went by a woman's name, Nastasia Ivanovna. "Well, Nastasia Ivanovna," whispered the Count, winking at him, "if you scare away the beast, Daniel'll give it to you." "I know a thing or two myself," said Nastasia Ivanovna. "Hush," whispered the Count, and turned to Simon. "Have you seen the young Countess?" he asked. "Where is she?" "With young Count Peter, by the Zarov rank-grass," answered Simon, smiling. "Though she's a lady, she's very fond of hunting." "And you're surprised at the way she rides, Simon, eh?" said the Count. "She's as good as many a man." "Of course. It's marvelous. So bold, so easy." "And Nicholas? Where is he? By the Lyadov upland, isn't he?" "Yes, sir. He knows where to stand. He understands the matter so well that Daniel and I are often quite astounded," said Simon, well knowing what would please his master. "Rides well, eh? And how well he looks on his horse, eh? A perfect picture. How he chased a fox out of the rank grass by the Zvarzinsk thicket the other day. Leaped a fearful place. What a sight when they rushed from the covert. The horse worth 1,000 rubles, and the rider beyond all price. Yes, one would have to search far to find another as smart." "To search far," repeated the Count, evidently sorry Simon had not said more. "To search far," he said, turning back the skirt of his coat to get at his snuff-box. "The other day, when he came out from Mass in full uniform, Michael Sidorich—" Simon did not finish, for on the still air he had distinctly caught the music of the hunt with only 2 or 3 hounds giving tongue. He bent down his head and listened, shaking a warning finger at his master. "They are on the scent of the cubs," he whispered. "Straight to the Lyadov uplands." The Count, forgetting to smooth out the smile on his face, looked into the distance straight before him, down the narrow open space, holding the snuff-box in his hand but not taking any. After the cry of the hounds came the deep tones of the wolf-call from Daniel's hunting horn. The pack joined the first 3 hounds, and they could be heard in full cry, with that peculiar lift in the note that indicates that they were after a wolf. The whippers-in no longer set on the hounds, but changed to the cry of "Ulyulyu," and above the others rose Daniel's voice, now a deep bass, now piercingly shrill. His voice seemed to fill the whole wood, and carried far beyond out into the open field. After listening a few moments in silence, the Count and his attendant convinced themselves that the hounds had separated into two packs. The sound of the larger pack, eagerly giving tongue, began to die away in the distance. The other pack rushed by the wood past the Count, and it was with this that Daniel's voice was heard calling, "Ulyulyu!" The sounds of both packs mingled and broke apart again, but both were becoming more distant. Simon sighed and stooped to straighten the leash a young borzoi had entangled. The Count too sighed, and noticing the snuff-box in his hand, opened it and took a pinch. "Back!" cried Simon to a borzoi that was pushing forward out of the wood. The Count started and dropped the snuff-box. Nastasya Ivanovna dismounted to pick it up. The Count and Simon were looking at him. Then, unexpectedly, as often happens, the sound of the hunt suddenly approached, as if the hounds in full cry and Daniel ulyulyuing were just in front of them. The Count turned and saw on his right Mitka staring at him with eyes starting out of his head, raising his cap and pointing before him to the other side. "Look out!" he shouted, in a voice plainly showing that he had long fretted to utter that word, and letting the borzoi slip, he galloped toward the Count. The Count and Simon galloped out of the wood, and saw on their left a wolf which, softly swaying from side to side, was coming at a quiet lope farther to the left to the very place where they were standing. The angry borzois whined, and getting free of the leash, rushed past the horse's feet at the wolf. The wolf paused, turned its heavy forehead toward the dogs awkwardly, like a man suffering from the quinsy, and still slightly swaying from side to side, gave a couple of leaps, and with a swish of its tail disappeared into the skirt of the wood. At the same instant, with a cry like a wail, first one hound, then another, and then another, sprang helter-skelter from the wood opposite, and the whole pack rushed across the field toward the very spot where the wolf had disappeared. The hazel bushes parted behind the hounds, and Daniel's chestnut horse appeared, dark with sweat. On its back sat Daniel, hunched forward, capless, his disheveled gray hair hanging over his flushed, perspiring face. "Ulyulyu! Ulyulyu!" he cried. When he caught sight of the Count, his eyes flashed lightning. "Blast you!" he shouted, holding up his whip threateningly at the Count. "You've let the wolf go! What sportsman!" And as if scorning to say more to the frightened and shamefaced Count, he lashed the heaving flanks of his sweating chestnut gelding with all the anger the Count had aroused and flew off after the hounds. The Count, like a punished schoolboy, looked round, trying by a smile to win Simon's sympathy for his plight. But Simon was no longer there. He was galloping round by the bushes while the field was coming up on both sides, all trying to head the wolf, but it vanished into the wood before they could do so. End of Book 7, Chapter 4. Book 7, Chapter 5 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 5. Nicholas Rostov meanwhile remained at his post, waiting for the wolf. By the way the hunt approached and receded, by the cries of the dogs whose notes were familiar to him, by the way the voices of the huntsmen approached, receded, and rose, he realized what was happening at the copse. He knew that young and old wolves were there, that the hounds had separated into two packs, that somewhere a wolf was being chased, and that something had gone wrong. He expected the wolf to come his way any moment. He made thousands of different conjectures as to where and from what side the beast would come, and how he would set upon it. Hope alternated with despair. Several times he addressed a prayer to God that the wolf should come his way. He prayed with that passionate and shamefaced feeling with which men pray at moments of great excitement arising from trivial causes. "What would it be to thee to do this for me?" he said to God. "I know thou art great, and that it is a sin to ask this of thee, but for God's sake do let the old wolf come my way, and let Karay spring at it, in sight of Uncle, who is watching from over there, and seize it by the throat in a death grip." 1,000 times during that half-hour Rostov cast eager and restless glances over the edge of the wood, with the 2 scraggy oaks rising above the aspen undergrowth and the gully with its water-worn side, and Uncle's cap just visible above the bush on his right. "No, I shan't have such luck," thought Rostov. "Yet what wouldn't it be worth? It is not to be. Everywhere, at cards and in war, I am always unlucky." Memories of Austerlitz and of Dolokhov flashed rapidly and clearly through his mind. "Only once in my life to get an old wolf, I want only that," thought he, straining eyes and ears and looking to the left and then to the right and listening to the slightest variation of note in the cries of the dogs. Again he looked to the right and saw something running toward him across the deserted field. "No, it can't be," thought Rostov, taking a deep breath, as a man does at the coming of something long hoped for. The height of happiness was reached, and so simply, without warning or noise or display, that Rostov could not believe his eyes and remained in doubt for over a second. The wolf ran forward and jumped heavily over a gully that lay in her path. She was an old animal with a gray back and big reddish belly. She ran without hurry, evidently feeling sure that no one saw her. Rostov, holding his breath, looked round at the borzois. They stood or lay, not seeing the wolf or understanding the situation. Old Karay had turned his head and was angrily searching for fleas, baring his yellow teeth and snapping at his hind legs. "Ul-ul-ul-ul," whispered Rostov, pouting his lips. The borzois jumped up, jerking the rings of the leashes and pricking their ears. Karay finished scratching his hindquarters and, cocking his ears, got up with quivering tail from which tufts of matted hair hung down. "Shall I loose them or not?" Nicholas asked himself as the wolf approached him coming from the copse. Suddenly the wolf's whole physiognomy changed. She shuddered, seeing what she had probably never seen before, human eyes fixed upon her, and turning her head a little toward Rostov, she paused. "Back or forward? No matter. Forward," the wolf seemed to say to herself, and she moved forward without again looking round, and with a quiet, long, easy, yet resolute lope. "Ul-ul-ul!" cried Nicholas, in a voice not his own, and of its own accord his good horse darted headlong downhill, leaping over gullies to head off the wolf, and the borzois passed it, running faster still. Nicholas did not hear his own cry, nor feel that he was galloping, nor see the borzois, nor the ground over which he went. He saw only the wolf, who, increasing her speed, bounded on in the same direction along the hollow. The first to come into view was Milka, with her black markings and powerful quarters, gaining upon the wolf. Nearer and nearer. Now she was ahead of it, but the wolf turned its head to face her, and instead of putting on speed, as she usually did, Milka suddenly raised her tail and stiffened her forelegs. "Ul-ul-ul-ul-ul-ul!" shouted Nicholas. The reddish Lyubim rushed forward from behind Milka, sprang impetuously at the wolf, and seized it by its hindquarters, but immediately jumped aside in terror. The wolf crouched, gnashed her teeth, and again rose and bounded forward, followed at the distance of a couple of feet by all the borzois, who did not get any closer to her. "She'll get away. No, it's impossible," thought Nicholas, still shouting with a hoarse voice. "Karay! Ul-ul-ul!" he shouted, looking round for the old borzoi who was now his only hope. Karay, with all the strength age had left him, stretched himself to the utmost, and watching the wolf, galloped heavily aside to intercept it. But the quickness of the wolf's lope and the borzoi's slower pace made it plain that Karay had miscalculated. Nicholas could already see, not far in front of him, the wood where the wolf would certainly escape should she reach it. But coming toward him, he saw hounds and a huntsman galloping almost straight at the wolf. There was still hope. A long yellowish young borzoi, one Nicholas did not know from another leash, rushed impetuously at the wolf from in front and almost knocked her over. But the wolf jumped up more quickly than anyone could have expected, and gnashing her teeth, flew at the yellowish borzoi, which, with a piercing yelp, fell with its head on the ground, bleeding from a gash in its side. "Karay! Old fellow!" wailed Nicholas. Thanks to the delay caused by this crossing of the wolf's path, the old dog with its felted hair hanging from its thigh was within 5 paces of it. As if aware of her danger, the wolf turned her eyes on Corray, tucked her tail yet further between her legs, and increased her speed. But here Nicholas only saw that something happened to Corray. The borzoi was suddenly on the wolf, and they rolled together down into a gully just in front of them. That instant, when Nicholas saw the wolf struggling in the gully with the dogs, while from under them could be seen her grey hair and outstretched hind leg and her frightened, choking head, with her ears laid back, Corray was pinning her by the throat, was the happiest moment of his life. With his hand on his saddle-bow, he was ready to dismount and stab the wolf, when she suddenly thrust her head up from among that mass of dogs, and then her forepaws were on the edge of the gully. She clicked her teeth. Corray no longer had her by the throat, leaped with a movement of her hind legs out of the gully, and having disengaged herself from the dogs, with tail tucked in again, went forward. Corray, his hair bristling and probably bruised or wounded, climbed with difficulty out of the gully. "Oh my God! Why?" Nicholas cried in despair. Uncle's huntsman was galloping from the other side across the wolf's path, and his borzois once more stopped the animal's advance. She was again hemmed in. Nicholas and his attendant, with Uncle and his huntsman, were all riding round the wolf, crying "Oo-yoo-yoo!" and shouting and preparing to dismount each moment that the wolf crouched back, and starting forward again every time she shook herself and moved toward the wood where she would be safe. Already at the beginning of this chase, Daniel, hearing the ul-yul-yuing, had rushed out from the wood. He saw Corray seize the wolf, and checked his horse, supposing the affair to be over. But when he saw that the horseman did not dismount, and that the wolf shook herself and ran for safety, Daniel set his chestnut galloping, not at the wolf, but straight toward the wood, just as Corray had run to cut the animal off. As a result of this, he galloped up to the wolf just when she had been stopped a second time by Uncle's borzois. Daniel galloped up silently, holding a naked dagger in his left hand, and thrashing the laboring sides of his chestnut horse with his whip as if it were a flail. Nicholas neither saw nor heard Daniel until the chestnut, breathing heavily, panted past him, and he heard the fall of a body and saw Daniel lying on the wolf's back among the dogs, trying to seize her by the ears. It was evident to the dogs, the hunters, and to the wolf herself that all was now over. The terrified wolf pressed back her ears and tried to rise, but the borzoi stuck to her. Daniel rose a little, took a step, and with his whole weight, as if lying down to rest, fell on the wolf, seizing her by the ears. Nicholas was about to stab her, but Daniel whispered, "Don't, we'll gag her," and changing his position, set his foot on the wolf's neck. A stick was thrust between her jaws, and she was fastened with a leash, as if bridled, her legs were bound together, and Daniel rolled her over once or twice from side to side. With happy, exhausted faces, they laid the old wolf alive on a shying and snorting horse, and, accompanied by the dogs yelping at her, took her to the place where they were all to meet. The hounds had killed one of the cubs, and the borzois 3. The huntsmen assembled with their booty and their stories, and all came to look at the wolf, which, with her broad-browed head hanging down and the bitten stick between her jaws, gazed with great glassy eyes at this crowd of dogs and men surrounding her. When she was touched, she jerked her bound legs and looked wildly yet simply at everybody. Old Count Rostov also rode up and touched the wolf. "Oh, what a formidable one!" said he. "A formidable one, eh?" he asked Daniel, who was standing near. "Yes, Your Excellency," answered Daniel, quickly doffing his cap. The Count remembered the wolf he had let slip and his encounter with Daniel. "Ah, but you're a crusty fellow, friend," said the Count. For sole reply, Daniel gave him a shy, childlike, meek, and amiable smile. End of Book 7, Chapter 5.